I spent 18 years keeping this company clean. Not polished clean. My name's Miles Duval, and for most of those years, I was head of risk and compliance at Whitmore International. Which means I was the guy who kept the bleeding off the balance sheet, the lawyers out of the boardroom, and the founders out of prison. I wasn't flashy, I wasn't loud, but I knew where every body was buried because I helped move most of them. They say you can spot a bad decision by the watch on a man's wrist. The second Jared Whitmore walked into Monday's meeting wearing his dead father's Rolex, I knew mine was coming. He didn't speak right away, just stood at the head of the table like he'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. Cuffed sleeves, fresh haircut, grinned slicker than the conference room glass behind him. Nobody asked why he was there. Nobody needed to. The founder had been gone 6 months. And Jared had spent those 6 months plotting how to make the company his. New logo, new vision, new leadership. Which of course meant cleaning out the old. He didn't call it a firing. He called it realignment. Even printed it at the top of the agenda in blue serif font. He had a clipboard. He had names. And when he got to mine, he didn't even look up. Miles Duval, he said, pen flicking the air. Effective immediately. That was it. No eye contact, no handshake, just a check mark. Janine from payroll blinked so hard her lashes came half loose. Someone dropped a pen. No one spoke. And me? I stood up, straightened my tie, said 5 words I had saved for someone exactly like him. Thank you for your clarity. Then I walked out. No folder, no scene. Just the slow, even steps of a man who knew exactly what was about to happen. I didn't cry, didn't panic, didn't scream into a void. I just went home, made tea, added whiskey for the antioxidants, and opened the fireproof folder I kept hidden under the sink. I hadn't looked at it in 5 years, but I remembered every page, especially one, Clause 17E. Let me explain. Back when the founder still ran the place before the buyouts, before the board stacked itself with investors who'd never built anything in their lives, I uncovered a quiet 7-figure leak in our South Asia ops. Could have been swept under the rug, but I didn't sweep. I brought it to him, William Whitmore, the real CEO. A man who never smiled unless something hurt. He gave me 2 options, a bonus or a clause. I chose the clause. I drafted it myself. Had legal review it twice. Tucked it deep into the executive contract structure behind the NDAs and insurance jargon. He signed it without blinking. That was Clause 17E. A silent tripwire. A kill switch buried in plain sight. The language was clean, intentional. In the event of termination without documented cause, the named executive retains unilateral authority to initiate a third-party forensic audit of all company financial activities spanning the prior 24 months. Independent firm. Immediate activation. No board override. That named executive was me, and now I had just been terminated, without cause, on paper, in front of witnesses. That meant the clause could be triggered. Not by HR, not by the board, by me. I didn't call a lawyer, didn't text a soul. I powered on my laptop, opened the secure compliance inbox, attached the PDF of my termination notice. No subject, no message, just the document and the clause. Sent to the legacy audit address, the one routed directly to Willoughby & Kent, our original outside compliance firm. No one remembered that inbox existed, but I did. I checked it once a quarter, just in case. After that, I closed the laptop, poured another drink, sat by the window as dusk began to drag itself over the skyline. I wasn't angry, not really. Anger was useful when you still had something to lose. I was past that. What I felt was colder, cleaner. Not revenge, not yet. Just the quiet certainty of someone who knows the fuse has been lit, and the room hasn't noticed the smoke. I didn't answer my phone, let it buzz. 2 messages from coworkers, 3 from numbers I didn't recognize. Didn't matter. The audit clock had already started. 72 hours, no delays. And Jared, he had no idea. He thought he'd made a move. Thought the board would see him as decisive. Thought the Rolex made him look like a man worth following. But he didn't realize the paperwork he signed that morning was also his matchstick. And me. I just waited, because sometimes the best way to burn it down is to walk out quietly and let the foundation collapse under its own weight. If you've ever been dismissed by someone who thought they owned the room, subscribe. Because some exits don't mean surrender, they mean countdown. The funny thing is, no one ever questioned why I kept hard copies of everything. People used to joke about it, said I was old school, called me the archive. Even Jared once smirked and asked if I kept a filing cabinet in my car. I didn't answer, because it wasn't really a joke. I did keep things. Printouts, backups, scans on encrypted drives no one else had the passwords for. Not because I didn't trust the system, but because I'd spent enough years inside the system to know exactly how fast it could eat its own. Clause 17E wasn't written in a moment of panic. It wasn't some hidden revenge blueprint or secret insurance policy. It was a line of code I added to the company's DNA, because I knew that one day someone like Jared would show up. Too confident, too young, too loud, and not nearly careful enough. Back when the company still operated out of 2 floors in Midtown, we had a different culture. Risk wasn't a liability, it was a department. My department. People came to me with whispers, questions, numbers that didn't line up, vendors that didn't exist, and I listened, every time. I didn't push it uphill, I cleaned it where I found it. But when something reached the top, and I mean the top, I made sure it wouldn't happen again. The clause came out of one of those moments. A quiet audit. 3 countries, 6 figures gone, chalked up to logistics discrepancies and currency misalignments. But I knew better. Someone had found a crack and started pouring money through it. Not enough to raise flags, but enough to get my attention. I brought it to William Whitmore himself, the founder, Jared's father. He didn't thank me, didn't even nod. He just said, make sure it never happens again. So I did. I rewrote the risk framework, created new escalation paths, and drafted a clause. Not for daily use, not even for annual review, but for the moment the system turned inward. When it was no longer about external threats, but the ones sitting at the table. Clause 17E was a page and a half, precise, dry, lethal. It authorized the immediate engagement of a pre-approved external audit firm should any executive with more than 10 years of continuous service be terminated without documented cause, and possess reason to suspect financial irregularities at the C-suite level. The trigger didn't require consent, didn't need board review, didn't even notify internal legal first. Once activated, it was live, autonomous, irreversible. I remember when I first presented it to legal. They skimmed it, nodded, marked it as low risk, said it was a redundant protection measure, said no one would ever use it. I didn't correct them. That was the point. People don't fear the things they don't understand. They overlook them. The founder signed it in blue ink. We never spoke about it again. But after that, every quarter, I checked the inbox tied to that clause. LegacyAudit@willoughbykent.com. Just to be sure. The years passed. The company grew. The founder got older. And then, he was gone. Pancreatic cancer. Quick. Quiet. Jared stepped in 3 months later. And within weeks, everything started to change. New faces, new language. Talk of modernization, agility, and digital-first leadership. He didn't dismantle the system, he ignored it. Which in my line of work is worse. At first I tried to stay neutral. Kept my reports short. Did my job. But the signs were there. Expense accounts without oversight. New vendors with no procurement trail. Buzzwords hiding bad math. I flagged a few. Raised some questions. Got a pat on the head from someone who used to be my junior. That's when I knew my time was limited. So I reviewed the clause again. Printed a new copy. Highlighted the activation line. Placed it in the folder under my sink, and waited. People forget how fast things can turn. One Friday I was in a budget call. By Monday I was on the sidewalk. No explanation. No warning. Just a decision from a man who had never written a compliance report in his life. He thought removing me would be a clean break. A silent departure. He didn't know about the clause. Didn't remember that it even existed. Didn't bother reading the contract his father signed over a decade ago. But I did, and now it was active. I imagined the moment they'd realize, a junior analyst maybe, opening the legacy inbox, not recognizing the sender, clicking the PDF, reading the words, termination, without cause, activation protocol immediate. Then the cascade would begin. Log reviews, Card statements, vendor traces, crypto trails. And finally the calls. Calls to people like Dominic. I hadn't spoken to Dominic in years. But if they were serious, really serious, they'd bring him in. And if they did, Jared wouldn't be the only one sweating. I didn't feel joy. Just a slow settling sense of alignment. Like the pieces were finally in the right place. Like a scale had tipped back towards center. The clause wasn't revenge. It was precision. And precision, that's something Jared never understood. There's a strange kind of silence that follows a dismissal. Not the loud kind. Not slamming doors or raised voices. Just the absence of friction. That's how it was the day I left. No arguments, no pleading, no one following me into the hallway with nervous apologies. Just a long conference table, a clipboard, and a CEO who didn't know what he'd just stepped into. I boxed my office in under 10 minutes. There wasn't much to take. A framed photo. 2 legal books I never really used but liked having around. And a hard drive unlabeled plane packed with 10 years of quiet pattern recognition. I didn't say goodbye. Didn't wave through the glass. And no one came to stop me. Some glanced up from their screens. Some didn't look at all. A few offered tight, polite nods, the corporate version of, "I wish it wasn't you," without saying anything real. I didn't blame them. They were survivors, not allies. And survivors, they don't salute the ones going overboard. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Maybe it was just my pulse. I watched the numbers descend. 32, 24, 17. Ground. When the doors opened, I stepped out into a lobby that looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Marble floor. Muted lighting. A receptionist behind a desk not making eye contact. Security didn't flinch. They'd already cleared me. That's how fast it moved. Outside the city didn't care that I'd just been erased. People rushed by with coffees and half-eaten breakfasts. A delivery truck beeped in reverse. The sky threatened rain but hadn't committed yet. I stood there for a moment. Not lost, just still. Then I turned left, walked 3 blocks, and got into the back of a rideshare with a driver who didn't ask questions. The kind of silence I could respect. At home the air felt heavier. Maybe it was me. I didn't turn on the lights. Just dropped the box on the table and sat down across from it. Stared for a while. Not at the contents, just at the space around them. A career can be condensed into such a small footprint. A few papers, a flash drive, a memory of where you used to sit. I opened the folder again, read the clause one more time, not because I didn't believe it, but because there's something final about reading your own words and knowing they still hold. 17E. That night I didn't sleep much. I didn't dream of revenge. Didn't imagine headlines or firings. I thought about timing. How long before someone opened the inbox? Would they even recognize what they were seeing? Would they stall? I didn't think so. The clause was specific. And once the audit was triggered, the firm had standing orders. Initiate, no delays, no notifications. And most importantly, no internal routing. By morning, I still hadn't received a single message from anyone in the company. Not HR. Not legal. Not even the assistant who used to bring me coffee and news about which execs were fighting again. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was clean. Which told me they hadn't figured it out yet. Good. That meant the first call would come from outside. I spent most of that day reading. Not articles, not reports. Just a novel I'd been meaning to finish for over a year. I sat by the window, watched the clouds roll over the skyline. Let the words pass through me like water. There was nothing else to do. No drama to stir, no leaks to orchestrate, no phone calls to make. The work was already in motion. All I had to do was stay out of the way. Late that afternoon, a text came in. Unknown number. Did you do something? No greeting, no name. But I recognized the rhythm. It was Janine from payroll. Same clipped phrasing, same anxiety hidden under punctuation. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, another one. People are acting weird. Something's off. The legal team's on edge. Still, I didn't reply. They weren't ready to know, and I wasn't ready to explain. By the end of the day, I had 4 messages. All vague, all nervous. One asked if I'd heard about outside activity. Another said the CFO had gone quiet, like scary quiet. The signals were starting, and I could almost feel the ripple, like the hum in the air before a power outage. They didn't know what had hit them. Not yet, but they would. I poured another cup of tea. Skipped the bourbon this time. Watched the sun fade behind the buildings across the street. I used to think exits had to be loud to matter. That walking out had to come with slamming doors or fiery speeches. But I'd learned better. Sometimes silence lands harder than sound. And when it's done right, it doesn't need applause. It just needs to be irreversible. It started on a Wednesday. Gray skies, wet sidewalks. The kind of morning that feels like a warning before anything actually happens. I wasn't there to see it, but I knew the choreography by heart. Security letting them in without hesitation. Badges scanned, credentials confirmed, no questions asked. 3 people, 2 men, 1 woman. Dark suits, neutral expressions. Nothing that screamed threat. But if you looked closely, too calm. Too quiet. The lead auditor always walks a half step ahead. Not because of ego, because they've done this before. They don't ask for directions. They already know where everything lives. Reception would have blinked, maybe tried to stall, but protocol wouldn't let her. Audit team from Willoughby and Kent. That name still carried weight, even after a decade. Especially after a decade. They didn't go to HR first. They didn't talk to Jared. They went straight to records. That was by design. Clause 17E gave them full access financial operational internal comms. No delays, no escalation chain. They just had to show the activation key. It would be on the letterhead. Signed years ago by a man who no longer existed. Meanwhile, upstairs, Jared was in the middle of a vision brunch. That's what he called them. Once a month? Catered, soft jazz. Talking points printed on recycled linen paper. He liked to talk about legacy, alignment, brand evolution. But as he raised his mimosa, someone would have leaned in, whispered something close, low, and his smile would have faltered just for a second. Then come the questions. Who sent them? Why now? Why didn't I know? He'd assume it was about compliance. Maybe an old vendor issue. Nothing urgent. Not yet. Downstairs, the audit team would have started with expense records. That's always where the rot shows first. The small things. Meals that don't match the calendar. Consulting fees with no contract. Reimbursements labeled strategy with no deliverables. All of it subtle. But they weren't looking for individual mistakes. They were mapping patterns. And patterns, they always lead somewhere. By noon, the whispers had started. Someone posted in the company Slack. Anyone know why legal's locked down? Another replied. 3 people in suits just walked into finance. Then someone joked, maybe they're here to finally audit the coffee budget. But humor like that never lasts long. Not when it's followed by silence. Jared tried to stay composed. He called a brief check-in with legal, asked for updates, got vague answers. He called the CFO. No response. Then he checked his email. Nothing. That's what probably scared him the most. No warnings, no alerts, no trail. Just presence. At 2:17 p.m., a message hit 3 inboxes records, legal, IT. Requesting access to encrypted storage logs, 7 years back. No request for approval, just notification. Attached 1 scanned signature. William Whitmore. That was the moment things stopped being internal. That was when Jared knew this wasn't routine. Janine from payroll texted me again that afternoon. They're looking at card charges. High level. Is this about you? Still no greeting, still no sign-off. I didn't reply. By 4 p.m. legal had gone silent. Slack statuses flipped to away. No one was picking up direct calls. People started speculating. Someone pulled up a reimbursement from 3 months ago. A luxury hotel suite in Paris listed under client trust development. No client listed, no follow-up meeting, just a receipt. They passed it around like a ghost story. Meanwhile, Jared kept moving. He had meetings, he made small talk, he smiled too much. But his jaw was tight, and the sleeves of his shirt were rolled higher than usual. That's how it starts. Pressure doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in, one vein at a time. Back at home, I watched it unfold through gaps in texts and old habits. I checked the company's press releases. Nothing. I searched for chatter on forums, still quiet. But the silence felt thinner, like glass about to crack. Just before sunset, someone forwarded me a screenshot. Anonymous number. It was a system ping from the audit portal. Tier 3 compliance evaluation in progress. External authorization validated. No hold. Simple, clean, decisive. Which meant they'd passed the point of pause. Now it was active. Files being copied, card histories decrypted, vendor profiles cross-checked. Someone somewhere was building a report. And Jared, he was out of moves. He just didn't know it yet. By the end of the day, the only noise in the office was the sound of typing. Fast, defensive. People forwarding things to themselves. Saving documents. Closing tabs. The kind of flurry that doesn't come from productivity. It comes from fear. When the lights finally dimmed and the janitors started their rounds, Jared sat in his office. Glass walls. Untouched drink. His phone screen lit up every few minutes. He looked, but didn't answer. Because somewhere in his mind a question had finally settled. One I'd waited a long time for him to ask. Who activated the clause? And the answer was simple. I didn't leave a trace. I left a fuse. And now he was standing in the smoke. I hadn't thought about Dominic Crane in years. Not because I forgot him, but because he was the kind of person who didn't leave much behind. He moved through rooms like a breeze, soft, unassuming, almost forgettable, at least at first. But that was before I trained him. He came to us in 2011, fresh out of grad school. Still wore a lanyard with his name on it like he didn't quite believe he belonged in the building. His resume was clean. His formatting wasn't. That was the first thing I told him. You can't submit a financial model that looks like a birthday card. He looked confused, then nervous, then embarrassed. I let the silence hang. Not because I wanted to scare him, but because I wanted to see what he'd do next. He redid the report 3 times, each version tighter than the last. By the end of his internship, he was formatting cleaner than half the senior staff. He was smart, but that wasn't what stood out. It was how he listened, how he didn't interrupt, didn't try to impress. Just absorbed everything like a sponge and filed it away. I used to tell him, if you're the quietest person in the room, make sure you're also the most prepared. He didn't respond. He just nodded. Like he understood something most people take years to figure out. After his internship ended, we kept in touch. A few emails, a couple coffee meetings. Then time did what it always does. People drift. But last I heard he'd gone into forensic audit. Willoughby and Kent, no less. I wasn't surprised. He'd always had the temperament for it. Unshakable. Neutral. Precise. So when I saw his name on the metadata of the audit system ping, I paused. Just 1 second. Then I smiled. Dominic was in the building. Not as an intern this time. Not as a fly on the wall. But as the lead auditor on an investigation triggered by a clause I had written. A clause I never explained to him, because I never needed to. He understood systems. He respected silence. He wouldn't ask questions. He'd follow the paper. And the paper, it was already burning. That afternoon, someone forwarded me a blurry photo from the office, taken in secret. Angled over the rim of a coffee mug. 3 people in suits walking down the east corridor. One of them tall, lean, no expression. It was him. Same eyes, same posture, cleaner haircut. That was all. I imagined the look on Jared's face when he saw him. He wouldn't recognize Dominic, not at first. He wasn't around when Dominic interned. Didn't sit in those rooms. Didn't notice the young guy in the corner taking notes while everyone else talked over each other. But he'd notice him now. Because Dominic didn't walk like a junior anymore. He walked like someone who knew what he was about to find. By 3 p.m., legal had stopped responding to anything outside their own thread. IT locked down outbound drives. 3 people were quietly pulled into side rooms. HR sent out a vague memo about standard third-party evaluation. No one bought it. Someone posted to an internal channel, "Are we being acquired or investigated?" Someone else replied, "Feels like both." Jared tried to regain control. He held a team-wide sync, used phrases like routine check due diligence and nothing to be concerned about, but his voice cracked once. And Janine from payroll texted me again. "Your boy just spilled his espresso." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because at that exact moment Dominic was probably reviewing executive card activity, cross-checking it against vendor invoices, looking for gaps, timelines, shell companies. And he'd find them. Not because they were obvious, but because Jared was sloppy. He didn't know how to hide tracks. He only knew how to talk fast and hope people stopped listening. There's a rhythm to audit work. And Dominic had always understood rhythm. Start wide, narrow fast. Don't waste time chasing noise, follow weight. And the weight, it always lands on someone. At 6:08 p.m. my phone lit up. Email from a no-reply address. System generated. Audit protocol update. 3 lines. Lead investigator D. Crane. Tier. Escalation 2, 3. Scope expanded executive reimbursements. Innovation fund. I sat back, closed my eyes for a second. That was faster than I expected, which meant something had surfaced early. Something big enough to skip the polite phase. I imagined Dominic at the glass table in the conference room. Laptop open, files spread, silence in the air. The kind of silence you don't fill. The kind that waits for someone to break it. He wouldn't say much, he never did. But when he did speak, it would be clean, measured, and final. Jared would try to talk his way through it. Blame someone. Blame process. Use words like strategic growth and trusted relationships. But Dominic, he just asked for receipts, he always did. That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was nervous, I wasn't. I just wanted to see where Dominic would start cutting. 'Cause once he starts, he doesn't stop. Not until he hits the bone. And Jared, he was already bleeding. He just didn't feel it yet. By Thursday morning, the office wasn't running. It was humming. Not with productivity, but with quiet panic. People typed faster, walked slower, closed tabs when others walked by. The kind of silence you only get when everyone's pretending nothing's wrong. I didn't need a feed or a memo to know what was happening. I'd worked through enough investigations to recognize the rhythm. First comes the access, then the freeze, then the paper trail. And after that, if you're paying attention, you can almost hear the system groan. Like it's realizing it's about to be cracked open. Dominic would have started with the simple things. The reimbursed dinners, the vendor fees, the consulting charges that never had deliverables. That's where patterns begin, and patterns always lead to names. One of the first things flagged, according to a message forwarded by someone in legal, was a $14,200 expense tagged as innovation coaching. The receipt, a cigar lounge in Las Vegas. 2 guests, bottle service, no client name, no itinerary. Jared had labeled it as team alignment. But the only alignment happening that night involved a private backroom Cuban imports and a friend of his from business school who now ran a crypto startup out of a WeWork. Then came the bigger one. A wire transfer, just under $60,000, marked as Q2 strategic support, sent to a company called Centric Strategies. Except Centric didn't exist, at least not in any registered database. The address listed was a P.O. box in Delaware, the routing number tied to a personal checking account. No vendor agreements, no contract on file. Just a name, and the name didn't match anything on payroll. Dominic would have flagged that instantly. He knew what ghost vendors looked like. He knew how to reverse trace a shell company in 20 minutes. And Jared, he didn't have 20 minutes. By noon, the finance team was locked out of 2 shared drives. IT said it was a server issue, but everyone knew better. Compliance doesn't shut down access for maintenance. They shut it down to contain damage. Someone leaked an internal message that afternoon. A request from the audit team for all expense justifications over $10,000 for the past 6 quarters. No one had those. Not really. Not the way they were supposed to. They had calendar invites, PowerPoint decks, a few vague emails. But that wasn't evidence. That was narrative. Meanwhile, Jared tried to act like none of it was happening. He kept his meetings, made jokes, wore the same blazer 2 days in a row, probably thinking that made him look grounded. But people saw it. The small things. How his jokes didn't land. How he hesitated before every call. How he started carrying a notebook but never wrote in it. He was unraveling, not loudly, but slowly, inward. Janine from payroll sent me one more text. He canceled the Friday board update, just said, "We'll reschedule when priorities align." That normal? It wasn't. Not even close. The audit logs were growing. Every time a file was opened, downloaded, or altered, it left a footprint. And Dominic was following every step. Jared's problem wasn't the spending. It was the story. He had too many receipts. with no consistent narrative behind them. Too many strategy dinners without strategy. Too many vendor payments with no work delivered. Too many flights to nowhere. And worse, he didn't clean behind himself. There were copies, PDFs, Slack messages, calendar entries. It wasn't a question of if something would break, it was when. Late that evening, a message landed in my inbox. Anonymous, no name, just a subject line: "He's not sleeping." Inside was a screenshot of an internal chat thread. 3 team leads. One of them asked, "What happens if this goes public?" No one replied. That's when I knew the fear had shifted. It wasn't just about Jared anymore. It was about who else had signed off. Who approved the reimbursements? Who pretended not to notice? Because corruption rarely happens in a vacuum. And receipts, they don't care who held the pen. I closed the laptop, sat in the dark for a while, watched the city flicker through the blinds. I hadn't set this fire. I'd just made sure there was oxygen, and now the heat was spreading. You ever work somewhere long enough to know the quiet places? The cracks in the system where rot settles in, that was me. I didn't start out planning to take anyone down. I just wanted to protect what we built, before they turned it into something it was never meant to be. This wasn't revenge. It was the system correcting itself, finally. And I was just the one who left the light on. If you've ever been blamed for staying quiet when you were really just watching the trap close, subscribe. The rest of this story goes deeper than receipts. Some people expect revenge to be noisy, slam doors, loud speeches, crowds watching. But the best kind, it doesn't even know it's happened until it's over. I spent most of Friday at home. Didn't turn on the news, didn't refresh feeds, didn't text anyone, just read. There's something calming about paper. It doesn't blink at you, doesn't ask for attention. It just waits. Around noon, I stepped outside, walked to the corner cafe. Same one I used to stop at before board reviews. The barista didn't recognize me. That felt right. I ordered black coffee, sat by the window, watched the city move like it always did, unbothered by the things unraveling above it. My phone buzzed once. Janine. He canceled his one-on-ones. Locked in his office since 9. People are whispering. I put the phone face down. Didn't need more. What I'd set in motion wasn't a spectacle. It wasn't even personal. It was a clause, a file, a signature. Everything else was gravity, and gravity doesn't rush. Dominic would have reached the deeper records by now. Executive reimbursements, internal contracts, archived chat logs. The old paper. The kind that never gets deleted properly. The kind most people forget still exists. But not auditors. Especially not him. I imagine Jared pacing his office, checking his phone too often, sending short messages to legal with no subject lines. I knew that rhythm. I'd lived it before when I was cleaning up someone else's mess. But this time, no one was cleaning. Only collecting. Around 3 p.m., a message came in from a former colleague. He didn't say hi. Just, "Is it true you built the clause?" I didn't reply. A minute later, another line. "You don't have to answer. Just, if it is, I hope you know some of us are glad." People forget how small companies really are. Even the big ones. The floors are wide, the titles are tall, but the corridors are thin. And secrets don't stay hidden. They just get ignored until someone forces the lights back on. Another message, this time from someone in procurement. Dominic just asked for 3 years of vendor lists. Jared looks pale. That made me pause. 3 years meant they were digging deeper than the clause required, which meant they'd already found enough to justify widening the scope. It wasn't just reimbursements anymore. It was patterns. Possibly fraud, maybe worse. There's a line between negligence and intent. Once you cross it, there's no uncrossing. I'd written the clause with boundaries. 2 years, defined scope, tight language. But Dominic wasn't bound by my guardrails anymore. The moment something credible appeared, it became an open investigation. And Jared, he was surrounded by paper he thought no one would ever read again. I poured myself another cup of coffee, watched the steam curl against the kitchen light, sat down, tried not to think too far ahead. That evening, I got an email from a blocked address. No subject, just an attachment. It was a redacted PDF. Internal notes from a recent leadership retreat. Expenses, guest list, session summaries. I remembered that retreat. Jared had hosted it 3 weeks after a round of layoffs, said it was about strategic alignment, booked a boutique resort, imported a guest speaker from Europe, hired a branding consultant whose website had a background in interpretive dance. It cost more than most departments got in a quarter. And the kicker. I'd flagged it in the meeting notes, told him the optics were bad, told him the math was worse. He ignored me, waved it off. Now, those receipts were on someone else's desk. Around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Dominic. Not a call, just a message. We're going to need context soon. 5 words, no accusation, no assumptions. Just a heads up. The kind only someone who knew me would send. He didn't say why, didn't explain what they'd found. He didn't have to. I typed a reply, paused, deleted it, then typed again. Let me know when it's time. That was all. He didn't answer. Not that night. And that was fine. Dominic always moved at his own pace. Careful, thorough, deadly. I went to bed around midnight. Didn't sleep much. Just lay there staring at the ceiling, counting each breath, each moment. Outside, the city kept humming. Inside the building I used to call mine, it was a different sound now. The sound of files being opened, folders being traced, confidence unraveling. And I watched. Not out of pride, not out of satisfaction, but because I needed to see how far it would go. I had pulled the pin, but the direction of the blast, that was entirely up to them. It didn't hit the boardroom all at once. That's not how these things go. It starts in the margins, a late email that goes unanswered, a report that doesn't get forwarded, a quiet exchange in the hallway that stops when someone walks by. Then comes the real fracture. Not in words, but in posture, in timing, in the way people start copying legal on everything. By Monday morning, the board had gone quiet. That might sound strange, but in a company like ours, silence isn't stillness. It's strategy. When directors stop weighing in on calls, when replies get shorter, when half the calendar turns to tentative overnight, you know the ice is thinning. Someone forwarded me the internal scheduling grid. 3 emergency syncs had been added over the weekend. All private, no notes. 2 directors had rescheduled international travel. 1 canceled a keynote appearance. They weren't reacting to the audit anymore. They were preparing for fallout. Dominic's team had finished the preliminary sweep by Sunday night. And what they found wasn't small. Vendor discrepancies, reimbursement anomalies, wire transfers that didn't match deliverables. Some accounts linked to shell entities dating back 3 years. It wasn't one mistake, it was a pattern. And in compliance, patterns are what get you burned. The thing about boards, they'll tolerate a lot as long as the numbers hold, as long as the quarterly line stays green. But once the damage becomes measurable, once the math starts bleeding through the spreadsheets, they move fast. They protect the company, not the people. Jared must have known that. He'd grown up around the table, watched his father navigate crisis after crisis. But he must have also believed something his father never did, that blood buys loyalty. It doesn't. Not when the headlines start circling. Not when signatures are attached to fraudulent flows. Not when compliance reports get leaked accidentally or not. I heard from someone inside investor relations that Monday morning. He didn't say much, just that the phones had started ringing. Quietly, politely. But the questions weren't polite. They were pointed. Is this a governance issue? Will there be leadership changes? Should we be concerned about Q3 projections? They didn't want answers. They wanted cover. Because large investors don't panic, they reposition. And when they start repositioning, people get replaced. By noon, Jared had tried to take back control. He scheduled a live town hall, short notice, all hands. I didn't watch it, but I read the summary someone sent afterward. Buzzwords. Phrases like navigating complexity and temporary audit clarification. No mention of Dominic. No mention of Clause 17E. No mention of the board. Just vague reassurance and recycled language. Like that was going to fix it. But the damage was already upstream. Someone inside finance had submitted an anonymous memo to the board. Detailed timeline, screenshots, expense flags. It was signed only with the initials AG. I knew who that was. She used to run budget forecasting. Smart, precise, kept her head down. If she was talking now, it was over. The board members started making calls. Not to Jared. To each other. They were triangulating, trying to figure out who knew what and when, trying to place themselves in the clear zone early before anything stuck, because they knew what was coming, and no one wanted to be the last to jump. There's a look people get when they realize the floor beneath them might not hold. It's not fear, it's calculation. You start looking at handrails, distances to exits, how much weight your name carries if the floor gives out. Jared didn't have that look yet. He still thought the weight was manageable. That's what happens when you grow up thinking the walls can't fall. Late that afternoon, the board held a closed session. Not virtual, in person. 12 chairs, one long table. No assistants, no recording, just water paper and pressure. They didn't invite Jared. They didn't notify his office. But they did send an internal security advisor to sit outside the door. Standard practice for high-risk discussions. But the presence sends a signal. And in buildings like that, signals matter more than announcements. By the time the meeting ended, no one had spoken publicly. No emails, no press statements, no warnings. But 3 directors changed their calendar settings from public to private. And someone updated the bylaws folder. Access restricted. Only legal and board chair allowed. I closed the update window on my screen, sat in silence. It was happening faster than I thought. Not the audit, the unraveling. The way the structure bends once you pull out the wrong beam. And Jared, he was still walking around with a schedule full of standing meetings and internal optimism. He didn't see it yet, but the board had already started moving without him. Not because of anger, not because of betrayal, because the company was bleeding. And they were going to stop the bleeding even if it meant cutting off the hand that signed the checks. It didn't come through email. No CC, no calendar hold, no corporate header. Just a plain white envelope slipped under my door. Thick paper, sharp edges, no return address. The handwriting was familiar, confident, slightly angular. I didn't have to open it to know who it was from. Elena Whitmore, founder's widow, board chair emeritus, still the most precise operator in the building. Inside a single card. No small talk, no sentiment. Just 5 words written in ink. Suite 42, 9 a.m. confidential. Nothing else. No signature, no instructions, no title, which made it very clear who had sent it. I placed the card on the table, sat with it for a while. Didn't move. The last time I had spoken to Elena was at her husband's memorial. She hadn't cried, hadn't lingered, just shook hands, offered nods, and left before dessert was served. She'd built her own reputation that way. Always in the room, never in the spotlight. When Jared took over, she stepped back, publicly at least. Let him run the show. Let him rebrand things. Let him say legacy like he'd earned the right. But Elena was never gone. She just knew when to wait. I arrived at the building just before 9. No badge, no pass. But the front desk buzzed me through without a word. Security didn't flinch. The elevator didn't ask for a key code. When the doors opened on 42, I stepped out into silence. Soft carpeting, muted lights, frosted glass, and one person waiting. Not Elena, not a board member. Just a receptionist in a navy suit who nodded once, then gestured down the hall. The conference room was smaller than I remembered. Oval table, 10 chairs, one screen off. No coffee, no catered tray, just water. Elena was already seated. No papers in front of her, no phone. She looked at me, then looked away, as if she hadn't summoned me at all. I sat across from her. Neither of us said anything right away. She broke the silence. Softly, "You know why you're here." It wasn't a question. I nodded. She continued. "We've reviewed the findings. There's more. You knew there'd be more." Still not a question. Still no warmth. I didn't respond. She didn't wait for one. The board is moving, quietly, but decisively. Another pause. Then, we're going to need someone who understands the depth, who can stabilize without panicking the floor. She wasn't asking me to come back. Not exactly. She was letting me know there was space if I chose to take it. I studied her for a moment. Elena didn't plead. She didn't convince. She set the table and let others choose to sit down. That's how she'd survived 3 economic downturns, 2 proxy wars, and the slow decay of a founder-led company becoming something else. She knew timing. And she knew I was holding the one thing no one else had right now, clarity. I leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive, just enough to make it clear I was thinking. If I step in, I said I need access. No red tape. No chains of command. She didn't flinch. You'll have what you need. Authority to remove, I asked. A beat. If it protects the structure, she replied. Not yes, not no, but close enough. I leaned back, let the air settle. She tapped a finger once on the edge of the table, a signal, more for herself than for me. Then, we didn't expect it to get this deep. I almost believed her, but not quite. Elena didn't operate on surprise. She operated on distance. Let things reveal themselves, then step in when it mattered most. She wasn't cleaning up Jared's mess. She was managing the burn radius. She stood, meeting over. No handshake, no farewell. Just a nod. A door closing without sound. I left the building without speaking to anyone. Outside, the city was loud again. Taxis, street vendors, the usual chaos. But in my head, it was still quiet. Deliberate. When I got home, I opened the folder again. Not the contract. The one labeled structures, old notes, templates, names I hadn't read in years. If I was stepping back and even temporarily, I needed to be precise. This wasn't about ego or titles. It was about protecting what could still be saved. Later that night, Dominic sent a short message. Jared requested a meeting. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. He'd had his chance. Now the room belonged to people who read the fine print and remembered where the signatures came from. I arrived at the building before sunrise. No badge this time. Just a visitor pass that scanned green without hesitation. Someone had already reactivated my access. Subtle gesture, loud message. The elevator was empty. Mirrored walls. Faint scent of cleaning solution. When the doors opened on the executive floor, everything felt paused. Like the air hadn't moved all night. The kind of quiet you feel in your chest. Outside the boardroom, a junior associate sat behind a tablet, nervous, eyes darting. She didn't ask for ID, just tapped the screen and waved me through. I nodded, kept walking. Inside the lights were dimmed. One long table, half the chairs filled. Paper, not laptops. Elena was seated near the center, not at the head. I was expected but not announced. That's how she liked it. When I stepped into the room, a few heads turned. No surprise, no greetings. Just quiet acknowledgement. The kind that doesn't need words. I didn't sit right away. I placed a folder on the table. Red tab, 3 inches thick. Printed records, vendor logs, payment trails Jared thought had disappeared. No one reached for it, not yet. But eyes lingered, especially on the tab. I stayed standing. I'm not here to fix Jared, I said. Calm, measured. I'm not here to buffer the press or reassure investors. I scanned the room. If I step in, it's not to clean the mess. It's to remove the people who made it. A long pause. Then Elena spoke. We'll authorize full operational oversight. Not interim, not shared. Full. A legal advisor nodded. Pulled a document from a leather folder. 2 signatures already marked. Elena's. And one I hadn't seen in years, Herald Board Finance Chair. They weren't waiting for me to say yes. They were showing me they'd already decided. I signed. No flourish, just ink. Then I sat at the head of the table, not beside Elena. In her place. There was a shift in the room after that. Subtle, weight moving from one end to another. I opened the folder, turned the first page toward the center. Page 6, Vendor Profile-Centric Strategies. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. Payments began Q2 last year. No deliverables. No registered staff. The address leads to a mailbox in Delaware. I let that settle. This isn't one bad decision. It's structural negligence. No one argued. Someone near the end of the table cleared their throat. What's your recommendation? I didn't look at him. I looked at Elena. She gave a small nod. Permission. Full freeze on discretionary accounts, I said. Suspend Innovation Fund reimbursements. Issue clawback evaluations where violations exceed 10K. I paused. And remove Jared from all internal systems effective immediately. Another pause, deeper this time. A murmur started, low, uncomfortable. Then the door opened. Jared walked in. Not storming, not yelling. Just there. Tired eyes. Shirt untucked beneath a blazer that didn't quite sit right. He looked around the room. Why wasn't I on this calendar? No one answered. He turned toward me. What are you doing here? I didn't respond right away. Just slid the signature page of the oversight agreement across the table. He didn't look at it. "You can't," he started. I raised a hand. "Not a command, just space. You've already done enough." Security didn't drag him out. They didn't need to. A compliance officer entered quietly, held a sealed envelope and a temporary access badge. Jared's shoulders dropped, not in defeat, in disbelief. Like the moment was real now, and everything before it had been noise. He stepped back once, then again, then turned and walked out. No final words, no parting shot. Just gone. When the door closed, no one said anything. For several seconds, the only sound was the soft hum of the HVAC. Then I stood. "I'll need access to internal audit logs, IT server traffic, and contract approvals from the last 6 quarters. A nod from legal, a scribble of a note. And I'll be conducting direct interviews with senior managers alone. No PR filters." Another nod. No pushback. I gathered the folder, stood quietly. "You'll get a formal action plan within 48 hours. Then I left the room. Outside, the receptionist looked up startled. "Is Mr. Whitmore?" "He's no longer part of the process," I said. Then I walked to the far elevator, the one only a few of us used, the one you didn't ask about unless you'd been there long enough. It opened without a key card. I stepped inside. Watched the doors close. No expression. No victory. Just motion. Because I didn't come back for revenge. I came back for control. It was buried in the appendix. Page 147 of the old governance framework. Clause 8C subsection 3. Back when the company was still small. When founders still signed contracts with ballpoint pens. When risk wasn't an abstract line in a spreadsheet, but something you could smell in a server room at 2 a.m. I had written it, not for moments like this, but because I knew they might come. We called it the control safeguard provision. It sounded harmless. Just a procedural checkpoint, triggerable only under specific conditions. Documented fraud, confirmed breach of fiduciary duty, and one more clause no one ever read closely. Or if material misrepresentation in resource allocation results in harm to internal stakeholder trust. That's the one. That's where he fell. The audit hadn't just flagged Jared's spending. It had documented deliberate mislabeling. Vendor contracts with falsified scopes, client project funds rerouted to unrelated internal innovation, invoices that didn't match project codes, supervisors who couldn't explain 6-figure mentorship retainers. And it wasn't isolated. It spanned quarters, budget cycles, entire fiscal years. It had a shape now, and once you gave something shape, it couldn't hide. I sat with the general counsel on Tuesday morning. No drama. Just 2 mugs of coffee and a shared screen. He scrolled through the documentation. Didn't flinch. "You built this clause," he said. I nodded. He tapped the paragraph again. "No one's invoked it in 10 years. Doesn't mean it expired." "No," he said. "It means we forgot it was there." He closed the screen, leaned back. "You're invoking it now." I didn't speak right away. Then, "Not yet, but I want the language prepared." He understood. It wasn't about drama, it was about control. We weren't removing Jared. We were freezing him. Clause 8C allowed for provisional suspension of access, influence, and financial instruments without requiring full termination. It was designed for internal emergencies, quiet ones, where removing someone outright might trigger chaos, but leaving them in place would be worse. It granted the oversight lead in this case, me, temporary unilateral authority to initiate a compliance lockdown on any executive whose actions met the threshold. And the audit made it clear Jared had met it, twice over. By 2 p.m. the system was live. Jared's internal credentials were downgraded, email access mirrored, corporate cards suspended. His name was removed from all real-time dashboards. Meeting invites auto-declined. He could still enter the building, still sit at his desk, but he wasn't connected to anything. Not finance, not product, not decision flow. He was a figure with a nameplate. Nothing else. There was no announcement. Just a quiet ripple. A project manager noticed Jared's initials missing from a task chain. Someone in marketing pinged legal after getting a restricted sender alert on Jared's email. No answers were given. Just silence. And silence moves fast in a corporate setting. Jared called 3 times that evening. Didn't leave messages. Then he texted, "I'm hearing things. What's going on?" I didn't reply, because he wasn't asking. He was searching for leverage, and there wasn't any left. The next day, I had lunch with Dominic. First time face-to-face since the audit began. We didn't talk about Jared. We talked about the systems, the culture, about how rot spread slowly, not with malice, but with indifference. He told me something I didn't forget. The problem wasn't that he cheated. It was that everyone expected him to. By Thursday, the board had aligned. Not publicly, but you could feel it. Voices more coordinated, memos more precise, legal steps tighter. We weren't aiming to punish Jared. We were moving past him. The clause had done its job. It hadn't destroyed him. It had removed his hands from the wheel. Everything else that would be gravity. Later that night, I opened the old archive, the original version of the governance charter. I ran my fingers along the edge of the page where Clause 8C had been added. It was marked with a small dot of ink, like a fingerprint from the day it was signed. I had almost forgotten that. But the system hadn't. It had remembered, quietly, faithfully, waiting. And when the time came, it did what it was built to do. Not loudly, not emotionally, just function. The building felt quieter now. Not empty, just adjusted. The tension had gone out of the air. Not because things were fixed, but because the bleeding had stopped, and people could breathe again. I passed Jared's office on the way to mine. The door was closed, still had his nameplate, still had that framed photo of him and his father inside. Nobody had touched it. Not out of respect, not out of fear, just inertia. Sometimes that's all you need to make something invisible. I didn't slow down, didn't look in. That part was over. Most of my day was spent cleaning up what he'd left behind. Audit follow-ups, restoring vendor trust, writing new protocols for financial transparency. Meetings were shorter now. Fewer slide decks. More real questions. People were cautious, but present. And for the first time in a long time, honest. Around mid-afternoon, I stepped outside. Same plaza I used to walk through back when I was on the margins. Back when I was the guy people forgot to loop in. Now they paused when they saw me. Not out of deference, not because of title, just recognition. Like they finally saw me for what I'd been all along. Not ambitious, not loud, just consistent. That evening I got a call from Elena. Short, "It's done," she said. I knew what she meant. The board had voted. Jared was officially removed. Not just suspended, not just frozen. Removed. No press release, no apology tour. Just erased. I stood by the window of my apartment phone still in my hand. It wasn't satisfying. Not in the way people think revenge feels. It didn't light me up inside, didn't make the world tilt back into balance. It just cleared the noise. The truth is, I didn't write that clause for Jared. I didn't write it to trap anyone, or to get my job back, or to make a point. I wrote it because the company mattered, because systems don't protect themselves. And I'd seen what happens when the wrong person thinks they're untouchable. Years ago, Harold, our old finance chair, told me something in passing. Every company has rot. The difference is whether anyone bothers to draw a line before it spreads. I never forgot that. So I drew a line, quietly, legally, permanently. And when the time came, it held. Somewhere out there, Jared will rewrite the story, maybe even believe it. Say he was betrayed, blindsided, thrown under. But people like him always rewrite history, because they think narrative is stronger than record. It's not. The system held. That's what mattered. The company didn't collapse. Good people didn't get scapegoated. And a mistake didn't become the future. It just ended, right where it was supposed to. In the weeks that followed, I stepped back again. Not out of spite, not out of fear, just clarity. I'd done what I came to do. Elena offered me a permanent role, board seat, long-term strategy. I said no. Some people think revenge is a destination. It's not. It's a checkpoint. You pass through it, then keep walking. Now I consult, quietly, precisely. Not to build empires, just to reinforce foundations. Because I've learned the most dangerous people in the room aren't the loud ones. They're the ones who think no one's watching. I watch. And if this story means something to you, if you've ever been overlooked, replaced, or underestimated, know this. You don't need noise to be dangerous. You just need clarity and time. Thanks for listening. If you've stayed with me this far, consider subscribing for more stories like this. Not for drama, but for the truth behind it. We all carry quiet chapters. Sometimes they speak loudest.